And it was a very hot day, very hot. And then I left the house. I came just exactly as we've come, drinking that bottle of brandy and shouting at God. And I shouted at God and I said, "Oh, you must be an evil God, and show me that you're an evil God and just kill me." And when I got here, just over there, I passed out. I don't know how long I was passed out for, but I don't think it was very long. Same bird. And I woke up and I was absolutely sober. And there was some grass where I was lying. And the green of that grass was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And that little bird that's singing now is the same bird, same song. And it was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. And in that moment, I knew everything. It's like I was enlightened. And in that moment, I felt like God was holding me, like only your mother can hold. And completely safe, completely fine, everything good, everything beautiful. And I got up from there and I walked home. And when I got to the house, my parents looked at me and go, "What happened?" Well, I said, "I had a good day." And on the Tuesday after the long weekend, I went back to work. And when I went into the factory I worked, maybe 100 and something people, everyone turned to look. People go, asking what happened. And I didn't know what had happened, but I was radiant. And that was a transformative part of my life. So before that, I was alcohol and I was drugs and I was bad friends and I was not going anywhere. And after that, I ended up going to Nepal, being in a monastery. I ended up going to the US and to Canada. I ended up with my life happening up to this day. This is a turning point in my life. So this is this. When I was young, I went through rites of passage. And at that time, I was too young to understand the implication of going through rites of passage. And I kind of forgot about it for a while until I was much more grown up. And I suddenly became again interested in rites of passage, and people who don't normally have access to rites of passage started asking me how they could have access to rites of passage. So I went back to one of my teachers who had taught me herbalism when I was young, and I knew that he was a rites of passage facilitator. He is what they call diKoma, a Koma doctor. And I asked if he would teach me something about rites of passage, and he agreed. And I started an apprenticeship with him. And he was a man who comes from the central Kalahari, and the rites of passage which are done there are different to the ones that I went through, and they're different to the ones which happen in the area where we live. But they're a very profound set of rites of passage, and they take young boys into young adulthood, and they take young men into full manhood, and they take older men into senior manhood. And so we do those rites of passage out in nature, which is where these kind of ceremonies happen. And I make a differentiation between rites of passage and processes of passage. So it's not a long coaching thing with telling people how to be a man. It's going into the wilderness to go through some ceremonial rites. They're not tests, they're not endurances, they're not proving your manhood. They are just a very, very profound set of rituals which have a very profound impact on men and bring them into a kind of power that it can only be passed on by other men through the generations, and have been passed on from one generation of men to the next through many generations, and probably going back through millennia. So to date, we've had 8 groups who've been through rites of passage here, and of those groups, some of the people have come from here in Botswana, some from South Africa, And now recently people are coming from Europe and the US to attend rites of passage here. We also, I'm involved in the traditional rites of passage in this country. I am a fundraiser for the cultural group who run the rites of passage. And my hope eventually is that the rites of passage that I run may be more involved with the rites of passage which are run in the tribal area, and that a semblance of a fraternity could grow between people from Europe and the US and people who have been through the rites of passage in this country. So this slab here, this is where my teacher Mashuru Chauke lived, and over there was a scrapyard, and he was a guard for a scrapyard. And so because he was a security guard and he was an old guy, then he was also a traditional healer. And then people used to come here. And if you look over there, where there's a pile of rock, there used to be a big tree there, and people used to sit and wait for him there. And then they used to come, and then there was another little hut over there where he would see his clients. And this was, I started learning from him in 1981. And here was all open, and it was not pushed like it is now. People used to come from miles away. He was a very famous healer. So yeah, this is where he lived. I learned divination, so he was my first teacher of throwing the bones. And then he taught me about different kind of spirits, like the Mongoni, war spirits, Dao spirits. Yeah, that was, I learned a lot of herbs from him. The majority of the herbs I know, I learned from him. And he was the kind of teacher who he led by example, didn't like questions, didn't like to explain anything. He would do something and you would watch, and the next day he would tell you to do it again and get very cross if you forgot how it was done. So like over here, down here, there's a plant, it's a medicine. And it's a very powerful medicine, in fact. So we would go together and we would dig a plant like this one together. We'd dig it out and take the roots and bring them home back here and process them. And then he would treat his clients and I would help him treat his clients. And then maybe a week later, other clients would come who needed the same treatment. And then he would say, that root that we dug at that place the other day, you go and dig that and you come and treat these people now. And if I argued with that, he'd get very cross, and he was a very frightening guy. And so I learned like that. And I learned divination by sitting there watching him divine for the clients. He never explained any of it to me. So yeah, that was my first teacher ever, Mashuru Chauke. In the early 2000s, after I finished being initiated as a Sangoma, I had a lot of people come and were also initiated by me. Myself and Colin, my brother, used to initiate Sangomas here where we live. And over the years, we initiated a large number. And it seems that everybody who initiates Sangomas has a quota that they're given. It's part of the calling as an initiation teacher. And I came to the end of my quota. And when I came to the end of my quota, I gave up teaching anything for a while. But then as time went by, a new way of interacting came, and that was through mentees. A lot of younger people wanted to learn a much bigger and broader package of knowledge than simply becoming a Sangoma. They weren't called to train as Sangomas, but they were called into various types of the traditional medicine, herbs, and various types of divination, nature work, ancestor work. And so as the years went by, I started acquiring mentees. And at this point, I have mentees. Many of them are much younger than me. Young people who are very interested in traditional knowledge and in an apprenticeship in traditional knowledge. So they spend a lot of time with me. They spend a lot of time assisting me in doing the work that I do. We go into nature a huge amount, and through that way they learn. and they learn quite a broad spectrum of traditional knowledge, and they also learn my interpretation of traditional knowledge. So each person who goes through training and learning of traditional knowledge, in order to teach it, they teach the subject as it is, and then they also teach their take on the subject or their interpretation of the subject. So for me, because I'm multicultural, I am fluent in both English and in Setswana. I'm able to translate the more deeper and older Setswana concepts and understandings into English, and then pass them on to people who don't necessarily speak Setswana. So I do that. I mentor people here in Botswana. I have youth who come and see me and learn traditional things. And mentorship for me, it tends to be a lifetime relationship. So I've been mentoring some of my mentees for over 20 years. I've seen them grow from very young people to people in their middle age. I've seen their children grow up. And it's a very fulfilling work. So the other reason that people come to Botswana, and especially at the time when we have our big Thanksgiving ceremonies, is that many of them are mentees and they're in an apprenticeship of learning the various work which we do. So a lot of the work I do, it's become quite well known, and that is that I work with the ancestors. And for me, I don't define it as working with the ancestors. I work with community, and the ancestors are one of the communities who I work with. So I'm very interested in where we are placed, where we belong, and I believe that we all have a place, and we all belong in a context. And a lot of the work that I'm interested in is coming back to our own place and context. And that means being placed amongst our ancestors in the correct place, being placed amongst our family in the correct place, being placed in nature in our correct place, being placed in our history in the correct place, and then being placed in amongst the plants and the animals and the birds and the trees. And so here we call that beauty, when everything has its rightful place, its right time, and a harmonious interrelationship with everything else. And so a lot of the work I work with is around seeking where that kind of harmony or beauty lies, and how do we come back into that. Beauty is not something that we stray away from and have to come back to. It's something that we always aim for, and so we seek how to come back into the beauty. So I'm very involved in that work. I'm very involved in community, very involved in ancestors, and this is one of the things that brings people here. Many people from all over the world are very interested in ancestors and in coming back into community with their own ancestors and different kinds of ancestors. So over the years, various people have asked, can they come and accompany me and accompany myself and my brother Colin in the work that we do, and learn more about ancestors. So people come here and they join our life for a little while, from a couple of days to sometimes even a couple of months. And because we have a day-to-day practice with ancestors and various communities, the different communities, we have a deep practice with nature, we have a deep practice with the sacred sites in this area. People come and they are immersed in that, and we live together here at our homestead, and we are involved in things like cleansing ourselves with these kind of medicines which were lying all about me here, going on small pilgrimages to some of the sacred sites, and sometimes doing vigils out in the sacred sites, spending time in nature and immersing ourselves in nature. working with the ancestors of the people who lived here before we live here, working with our own family ancestors, sometimes working with the deeper ancestors who come to us through wars and conflicts, various things, and sometimes working with the very, very ancient ancestors, those who were the very first of our kind who lived this earth, those who painted on the rocks and those who made stone tools, and going right back into the ancient and mythic ancestors who we hear about in the tribal legends and stories. So this is the work that I'm involved in here, and this is the work that brings a lot of people interested to come and to join us here for short and longer times. These are medicines, these are plants, and these are gathered freshly, and these are something which I use in cleansing. And cleansing is where we reharmonize ourselves with nature and with everything which is good and everything which is in order and everything which is in its place. So I have a great love of the bush, and I have a great love of plants. And when I was a little boy, one of the first things that I was learning was herbalism. And herbalism is not necessarily what medicine or what herb you drink for what sickness, but it's how herbs affect your environment, affect your body, affect your community, affect yourself in your community. And so this is one of the things that when I come home here to Botswana, I spend a lot of time gathering herbs, and then these herbs are in the process of being processed, and they are going to be packaged. And I take them to Cape Town, where I also live, and sometimes I travel with them to other places in the world, and use them in my work and my treatments. So I use these herbs. Every plant here has a name, and the name says the plant which does this or the plant which does that. So every plant is named after what it does. So if you know the names of the plants, you know how they work, and you know what you can do with them, and then you know combinations. So I also work as a traditional diviner, and through divination we're able to see different ways of working with herbs and different ways of combining herbs and different things that herbs can do. So all kinds of situations that arise in life we can influence with herbs, and in that way we're always connected to nature, and we're always in the community of nature.